So my name is Alison Mangiero. I am with a group that's called the Tocqueville Group, or TQ Tezos. So the first thing that I should probably explain is who I am and why I'm here. You may have been expecting someone else. So the first thing to kind of get right, what is the Tocqueville Group, or TQ? Who is this guy? So like all great projects, we are named after a French aristocrat, Alexis de Tocqueville. Famously came to America to try to describe basically a new set of economic, social, and political conditions that were kind of taking place during the 1830s. This was all based on equality of conditions. He wanted to see how all of this was going to play out so that he could kind of report back to the people in France and say, this is what's coming, we need to be prepared for it. And so we see ourselves as engaging in a little bit of the same mission. We are evangelizers. We are kind of coming into Tezos, but also blockchain more generally speaking. We see what is its inevitable adoption, but we want to make sure that it's adopted in its best form. So that was a lot of high-level stuff. What is it that we actually do? At TQ, we are trying to bring about more awareness about Tezos, and we're trying to drive adoption of the protocol. So what that means is basically we are talking to businesses and entrepreneurs, trying to help them onboard to Tezos, make that process more easier than it currently is. We are working on building public goods and talking to developers to figure out what it is they need to make the ecosystem more user-friendly for the developer community. We host events. We had an awesome event last night, like the rest of the world, but we continue to do that to kind of spread more awareness about Tezos. We also create content to try to make the technical a little bit more accessible to a wider audience. So that's TQ and what we do. Sometimes it's a little bit confusing because people will say, oh, what's your roadmap? And I think the important thing to understand here is people will constantly ask, what's your roadmap? And they'll say, do you speak on behalf of Tezos? Do you represent Tezos? Well, there is no one roadmap for Tezos. That's because it's largely, the protocol is largely in the hands of the community, and the community actively determines what direction that protocol will take. That said, there are roadmaps that exist. There are many entities that are inside the Tezos family, or the Tezos ecosystem. And so we will be hearing later from Bernardo from Nomadic Labs, which is one of the entities in the Tezos ecosystem, about their roadmap for the coming year. But it's important to understand that there is also not one core development team that works on Tezos. So what's interesting about this is people are kind of always looking for who is the core. There are many teams that work on the core protocol, but there is not one core development team. So you see, actually, we have development teams on 5 continents that are actively working on building on Tezos, and it is very much a decentralized project in many different ways. So the basics, very, very high-level basics. I will leave it to Bruno to kind of dig down into the weeds. But the first thing I'll say is that Tezos is a live proof-of-stake mainnet, okay? We are actually live. We launched last year. We're in operation. You can use it today. This isn't something that's going to come about in the future. It's very much real. So that's the first thing to note. The second thing that I will point out is, like every other blockchain project, we have our lingo. So network validators in Tezos are called bakers, to play on staking, baking. And our proof-of-stake mechanism is what we call liquid proof-of-stake. It's not DPoS. So the key thing to understand here is there is not a fixed number of delegators in Tezos. Anyone who holds one role, which is 10,000 Tez for now, which we'll get into a little bit later, is able to participate in the process. So we don't have a limited validator set. That number can grow. And even for people who don't want to bake, someone like me, who I don't bake, they can delegate their tokens and still be actively involved in the process. So that's important to understand as well. Brief history in terms of the timeline, because we're kind of here to give a high-level timeline. So in 2014, the Tezos white paper came out. In February 2017, the testnet launched. And in July 2017, the Tezos Foundation raised $232 million to support open source development and research. Almost a year later, the Tezos BetaNet launched. This was in June of last year. It was very exciting. Around the time of launch, there were about 40 bakers or validators that were actively involved in the network. September 2018, we transitioned from BetaNet to mainnet. That was largely just a change of the name of the protocol. All of the transactions that existed during BetaNet persisted into the mainnet. So it was just that we had determined that it was robust enough to be worthy of that name, or I should say the foundation thought that it was worthy enough of that name to switch the name. And in January 2019, the first proposals to the protocol were put forward and will be voted on. So one of the key differentiators of Tezos is that there is an on-chain governance mechanism. And so we saw the first amendment to the protocol proposed in January of this year, and we're about to be to the point where we may actually see the protocol updated in the coming weeks. So that's very exciting. March 2019, Coinbase announced that Tezos staking, that Coinbase custody would have staking for Tezos. And in May of 2019, and this is kind of interesting if you take a look back, when we launched the BetaNet, there were about 40 bakers. Now there are over 480 bakers. And if you kind of look at the map, there are bakers in 34 countries across 6 continents. There's my Antarctica joke. And there's about 108 public delegates on mytezosbaker.com. If you want to go to that website, it kind of gives a good listing. And the interesting thing about this is all of these bakers are sharing 80 to 95% of their baking rewards with the people who are delegating to them. So that's kind of the current state of the baking ecosystem on Tezos. So I talked a little bit about governance. I'm going to do this very high level because Bruno is going to talk about it a little bit more in depth. But as I said, we're currently in the midst of the amendment process. So in January, the first proposal, which was proposed by the development team at Nomadic Labs, was to increase the gas limit and to lower the roll size from 10,000 Tez to 8,000 Tez, which would involve a lot more people to be engaged in baking. But the interesting thing about this was not even so much the content of the proposal, but the fact that we could actually do this, right? This is sort of a very interesting moment because we had thought about what on-chain governance in Tezos might look like, how the various bakers would act, how the people who were watching what the bakers were doing and delegating to them would act. But upgrading a live, decentralized blockchain network on-chain hadn't really been done at this scale before. So this was the first historic blockchain vote that took place. I think people are starting to party already. All right. We're at a crypto conference. So Athens, what's the point? Upgradability while maintaining decentralization. This is very important. So the interesting thing here is that we can have all of these bakers. When you think about it, I'm a political scientist by training, kind of a typical background, not at all. But the interesting thing for me is people talk about this at the nation state level all the time. This is the first time, when you think about it, these are people across 35 countries, across 6 continents, coming together, voting. There we go, much calmer. These are people kind of across, I don't have to make it as exciting because now the music's died down. But all these people coming together to vote and basically see what's possible. So we can, why is this important? We can maintain decentralization. People all over the world can be involved in this process. We can lower the time it takes to iterate on the direction we want the protocol to take from like a year to a year and a half if you were going to do a fork. To every 3 months. So the process from beginning to end in terms of the on-chain vote takes about 3 months. So if there's something that a development team that's working on Tezos wants to see included, they can propose that, and in 3 months' time, the protocol can automatically have that feature or have that change happen. Delegation is super important here because the largest bakers represent hundreds or even thousands of delegators, and so it's a way that we keep incentives aligned. It's not that there are 20 people who determine the future of the protocol. Even the 400 some odd people who are involved, I can see how my baker is voting on a particular amendment proposal, and if I don't like it, I can vote with my feet, right? So there's a way to ensure that those incentives are aligned and to keep the entire community engaged, which is interesting. So in terms of where we are right now, we need to hit roughly 80% to reach quorum. It's 81.39%. And we are nearly there. As of this morning, we were at 73.59% approving of the proposal. So we expect to see this go through, and if it does, we could see an updated protocol potentially as early as next week. So maybe to give you a little bit of an update on the funding side. So 2018 was largely kind of heads down, bootstrapping this proof of stake network that I mentioned. But the Tezos Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation that's supporting the Tezos ecosystem, largely research and tools and applications. The focus for 2018 was really on baking tools, on wallets, software wallets, hardware wallet support, academic research. We've supported people at Cornell, at INRIA in France, Mdea in Spain, Cambridge, Yonsei and SNU in Korea. And so the idea really was on the research side, try to ensure that there are people who are at the top of their game thinking about Tezos, and then also to kind of build the sort of must-haves in order to get the protocol off the ground. What we're focused on in 2019 is largest, in terms of like the larger Tezos family or community, and that the foundation is kind of committed to fund, is that there will be basically 2 tracks for grants. There will be ecosystem grants, largely tools and applications, public goods that we think are important in terms of what the ecosystem needs to thrive, and there are public calls that go out every quarter. Those are smaller grants up to about 50K to support tools and applications, and then there are larger research grants that will still be going to largely academic institutions. So in addition to that, we just had a recent public call for block explorers in high-level language that was issued by the Tezos Foundation. Bruno will talk about this a little bit later, but there is a language that is native to the Tezos protocol, Mikkelson, but the foundation is supporting a number of high-level languages that compile down to Mikkelson to attract more developers. So for instance, there will be SmartPy, which is a Python-like language that's going to be coming online in the next couple months. Lego, there are others as well, with the idea here that we can kind of keep what we like about the native language, but make Tezos and building on Tezos more attractive to a wider range of developers. And then the foundation also recently said there are going to be a number of initiatives to increase participation in the network. So that'll be things to spur more people getting involved in baking, the few people who haven't activated their tokens to help them with that, and to also generally speaking kind of bring about more awareness of Tezos and make onboarding much, much easier for people who want to be involved. So who's building on Tezos? This is the question, inevitably everybody asks. Who's building on Tezos? What are they building? What's going on? 2 things I'll mention. One, earlier in the year, Securitize and Elevated Returns, which is the company behind the tokenization of the St. Regis and Aspen, announced that they would be tokenizing $1 billion worth of real estate assets on Tezos. And Elevated Returns, originally when they tokenized the St. Regis, they did that tokenization on Ethereum, but they migrated for this larger pipeline to Tezos because Tezos really is built with both security and upgradability in mind. So for real assets like this, it's particularly attractive. So the group at TQ and others in the Tezos ecosystem are actively working with them on the tech implementation of that. And then another thing I'll mention is Chorus Mobility, which is a startup in the automotive space, won the Moby Grand Challenge. They're also building on Tezos, and there it's kind of about payments between, well, it's not simply between vehicle to vehicle, it's also between, it could be human to vehicle, it could be vehicle to infrastructure, but basically allowing vehicles to talk to one another. So these are just kind of a sample in terms of folks who are building on Tezos. Happy to talk more about that. But after the kind of high-level overview, I will now turn it over to Bruno from Nomadic Labs, who will dig into what is on their technical roadmap for 2019.
Hello everyone, so my name is Bruno. I have the privilege of being the final speaker of the final part of the final talk of the final day of changelog, and I hope there will be no loud music during my presentation. And I apologize for my thick French accent. So I'm a research engineer. I work for a company called Nomadic Labs, which is an R&D company based in Paris. So we're about 35 PhD engineers. So our mission is to contribute to the development of Tezos core software. And we also work on the mobile wallet called Cortez. So my talk would be like twofold. First, I would like to do a very high-level overview of what Tezos is. And then I'll talk about the technical updates that we've been working on at Nomadic Labs, principally. So I hope it will be technical enough and not too, and there will not be too many details, and that each of you will get something out of this. So Tezos is a platform for smart contracts. So we have a programming language called Mikkelson. So it's a very low-level one. It's stack-based. It's a mixture of low-level and high-level features. So the design goal for Mikkelson is like to be a trade-off between like being a reasonably high level so we can read the code, but still want it to be low level for easy gas accounting. And Mikkelson is like meant to be a good compilation target for other higher level languages. So of course we focus about security properties. So with Mikkelson we have like static typing, high level types, and data structures. So for example, we cannot have an arithmetic overflow because we have like arbitrary sized integers. Second, now we'd like to talk about our consensus algorithm. So there is a delegation mechanism. So the token owners can delegate their block creation rights. So it's liquid, which means that delegates can be chosen or revoked at any time. So it's not DPoS, as Alison already said. Everyone can be a delegate, and it incentivizes, direct participation. So it's a proof of stake. So the delegates they receive production rights in proportion to the amount of tokens that they were delegated to. So for performance issues, we track delegation with a granularity. So we call it a role. And currently, the value of a role is 10,000 tokens. And we'll see that in the Athens proposal, so the current amendment to the core protocol that is being voted, there is the value of the role will go down to 8,000 tokens. Last but definitely not least, Tezos is a self-amending ledger, as you probably know. So technically in the code base, there is separation between what we call the shell, which is like a network and storage layer, and what we call the economic rule set, or sometimes as well the economic protocol. So the economic protocol is basically what defines what is a valid transaction, a valid block, and if you have like several candidates for the next block, which ones to choose. So it contains many things, including like the consensus algorithm, the smart contract programming language, Mikkelson, and also voting rules. So it means that one of the rules of Tezos is that the rules can be changed. So it's like a self-referencing voting procedure. Right. So what can be changed through voting is the economic rule set. So how does it work? Very briefly. So any delegate account can submit an amendment proposal. So at the moment, the total process lasts 3 months. But as I said, this could be changed through a proposal. And a feature that I find like super exciting is the fact that when an amendment is voted by the community, the nodes are updated automatically. That means that if you are running a node of the Tezos network, if there is a change of the protocol, then you don't need to do anything. You don't need to stop and restart your node. It is updated automatically. Another very interesting feature is that when the rules are changed, there is a mechanism of inflation funding. That means that money can be created when the protocol is changed. And I think it could be a very efficient mechanism to incentivize developers to reward themselves. And so they would be like more willing to, they would be incentivized, to develop technical changes. So as that is that now would be like the second part of my talk, so the current changes and the future steps that we see that we will propose for Tezos. So as Alison already mentioned, there's a current proposal, so that is called Athens, because it's where democracy was born. So it was submitted by Nomadic Labs, so the company I work for, and it's currently in the last phase of voting, which should end at the end of the month, well, slightly before. And so the two main changes, there are like smaller ones, is the reduction of the role size, and also the doubling of the gas limits, so that we can like have more complex programs stored in the blockchain. Right. So at Nomadic Labs, we're working on the next proposal. So there will be like three main things. So the first one is like small improvements to the consensus algorithm. We wanted to make it more robust and more resilient. We also want to extend the Mikkelson. So as I said, the smart contract programming language is part of the economic rule set. So it can be changed only by voting. So we want to add some instructions to Mikkelson to make it easier to manipulate the stack, which means that it's going to be easier. It should be easier to write programs in Mikkelson. And we are thinking of also increasing the gas limit so that, again, we can have more powerful programs in Tezos. Okay, so as I said, there is a separation between what we call the shell and the economic rule set. So the economic rule set is the part of the code base that is changed through voting. But for the other part, the shell, it's not done through voting. So typically what happens is that there are public releases available on GitLab. And many people are working on these releases, and not only about Nomadic Labs. I think there are like 3 or 4 companies in several continents that are working on this, on what we call the mainnet releases. Right. So our plans for the mainnet updates, so that includes the shell and also the command line client. So for May, we are going to add the snapshots features, which means that you can run a lighter node that doesn't have the whole history of the chain, and which means that we'll be able to synchronize faster with the network. Also, a small thing, but I think it's very interesting, is that we're going to integrate in the command line wallet commands for making it very easy to use a multi-sig contract that will be certified. So I'll talk more about certification in the next few slides. And so the future release that is planned in July, so we'll work on an improved storage. So it will be like much more efficient. Like we expect at least a 10-time improvement. So this is work done in collaboration with Tarides, a Paris-based company. And also, we will improve, we'll have a new mempool. So basically, it means that the operations will be transmitted way faster. Right? We are also like working massively on having better contracts for Tezos. So the first step, still on the Mikkelson level, so that means very low level, is to have like certified smart contracts. So we have a framework called the Mikkelson. So I think I don't have the time to explain the pun. So coq is that means rooster in French. So it's the name of a piece of software, like a proof assistant, that allows you to have like mathematical guarantees about the behavior of your programs. So we have this framework, so called Mikkelson. And we have already started using it to verify smart contracts, for example, the multi-sig contract that I mentioned a minute ago. And we're working on like adding another, like a full portfolio of interesting and verified contracts. And so I mentioned that it was integrated in the command line client, but we would also like to integrate it on the Cortez mobile wallet, so the mobile wallet that is developed at Nomadic Labs. More broadly, well, Alison mentioned a few higher level programming languages. Obviously, Mikkelson is low level, that means it's hard to program in it. In the ecosystem, we are lucky enough that there are like many projects of higher level languages, and at Nomadic Labs, we want to collaborate with the people involved in these higher level efforts. And we want to work toward like a fully certified compilation chain. So that means that on the top, you have like a high level language that is much easier to develop, to program in. So it will attract many more developers. And then we'll have like a compiler to Mikkelson, or in fact to an intermediate language called Albert. And the very interesting thing is that the compiling, when you compile, that you have no guarantees of that what you compile has the same behavior than the original language, original program that you wrote. But what we want to do is like to have a certified compiler from the high-level language to Mikkelson or Albert, so that like the same guarantees in the actual programs that are stored in the blockchain, so in Mikkelson, then we could have about the programs in the high-level language. Okay. So on the core, so we are working on a new consensus algorithm. So it will be like similar to Tendermint, but with sortition. So that means that not everyone will have to validate the block. It will have better random seed generation. So again, Nomadic Labs is working in collaboration with other entities, so Cryptium Labs, which is the company based in Switzerland, and CEA. So CEA is a French research center who focuses on, historically, CEA has been working on nuclear security. So they are really strong, they have a very strong culture of security. And still regarding the improvement of writing a contract in Tezos, so we are doing an effort of gas profiling. So we'll have like a very accurate model of how much it actually costs to execute a smart contract. And also regarding privacy, so we are thinking of, we already started actually, importing lib sapling, so which is like a library developed by the Zcash project. So we could use like Zcash in Mikkelson contracts, hopefully in a verified way, and then we could have like private transactions in Tezos. Right, so thank you very much for your attention. Like I put on the last slides a few links, and I would also like to stress that so I mainly talked about like efforts made at Nomadic Labs, but obviously there are many other entities in the ecosystem that are working on very exciting things. I mentioned the higher level languages project. I could also have mentioned about some efforts regarding layer 2 possibilities in Tezos. Well, voila, that's all for me. Thank you again for your attention.
All right, it looks like we have a few minutes for Q&A, so awesome. Bring the mic over.
Thank you. The question is about randomness. It's the common problem for proof of stake, as I know. So when you need to select voters, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
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 Could you repeat? There is one word I didn't get. Sorry.
Okay. The common problem for proof of stake projects is the hard to product security randomness. Mm-hmm. And is this problem is do you have the same problem in Tezos projects, and how do you solve this problem? Or you don't need randomness now for your proof of stake technology?
I'm gonna get this one. So we do have a randomness. We do need to have some randomness to like select the baking, the block producing rights. So I guess it will be complicated to get into the details, but what I can say is that basically there is a phase where you only, so you want to have like, the random seed is generated by many actors, and we have like first a commitment. So by that, the last person who needs to add a bit of the seed doesn't know the beginning, what the others have done. So they can't track the distribution of the baking of the block producing rights. So first you commit the bit of a seed that you have generated, and then afterwards you reveal this part of the seed. Right. We can talk more about it offline if you want.
All right, I think we can fit one more in here.
Hello, thank you for your report. We are also a baker in the Tezos.
Great.
But question more about the legal side of the baking in the United States. So is it safe to be a baker in the United States or in the territory the CES can like think that this type of activity is like maybe pooling the resources could be mentioned like the security token or security activities? Maybe you have some recommendation or framework for such bakers.
So though my background is in public law, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not on stage to give you legal advice, probably best advised. But I will say there are a number of alliances, for instance, like the Proof of Stake Alliance that I know is working on this and trying to think about what some of the challenges may be and to help give advice to bakers and other people who are out there in the ecosystem. So personally, I don't have a legal advice that I can give to you on that front, but I know that there are organizations that are actively working on it.
All right, that's going to do it for us today. A little bit over on this session, but thank you very much
Thank you.
to both of you. And I'm sure you'll be wandering around and people can ask you a couple questions if they need to.
Yep.